Welcome to our second gathering of our third season of the Trauma Research Foundation Book Club. I'm Teresa Young, the Director of Operations here at TRF, and we are so excited to invite you to today's session. If you're joining us, as you're joining us digitally, you can feel free to use the chat box on the right and let us know where you're from, maybe how you're feeling. And then quick note, if you are finding that you can't comment, to be sure, just make sure you're subscribed to our channel in order to do so. So as you settle in, we're going to be beginning in just a couple of moments. So if you need to go and grab a cup of tea or a nice comfortable blanket, feel free to do that. I'll tell you a little bit about TRF and a little bit about what you can expect from today's book club. So the Trauma Research Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we are dedicated to supporting a growing community of clinicians, researchers, educators, and people whose lives are affected by trauma. Come on and visit our website. You'll find that we offer a variety of programs, from conferences like our International Trauma Conference, our Social Justice Summit. We are having our first ever annual play-based healing summit that's happening at the end of October. We have our institute, which is all of our certificate training programs, like our traumatic stress study certificate program and neurofeedback. We have a really robust research program where we offer different grants, like grant work in the intersection of technology and trauma or psychedelics. And then our community offerings, which is where the book club sits, which are the offerings that we offer for no cost. Things like book club, where we gather once every single quarter and we read a book together, we gather in community and we discuss. So thank you all for being a part of the Trauma Research Foundation community. Today's session, we are on our second episode of this 4-part series, where we are discussing, bringing together up to 10 panelists to discuss this quarter's book, which is The Master Plan: My Journey from Life in Prison to a Life of Purpose, written by Chris Wilson and Bret Witter. And a note that during the final episode, which is in 2 Thursdays from now, September 29th, is where Chris Wilson, the author, will be joining us for a live conversation. And to the virtual community, really excited to really welcome you to be active in our discussion today in ways that feel good for you. So again, using that chat function to share your comments throughout the session. Our team at TRF is actually tuned in with you, and we're continuously bringing over your comments, and we'll be sharing them after each of our discussions. So please do, discuss with each other, share what's on your mind. We're totally there with you. And in addition, if you would like to join and actually be a part of the panelists that you see here today, you can apply to be a panelist via our website. We welcome a diverse array of ages, genders, occupations. You don't have to have even finished the book to apply to be a panelist. So we truly welcome all voices. And our panelists today have also just come from our community and from all sorts of places. And as they share with us today, their reflections to the questions that we have, to know more about them, you'll find that we'll be dropping their bios into the YouTube comments. So that's a great way to get to know our panelists. And with that, want to also give a shout out to the TRF team that makes this entire production possible. Pat, our media manager, is here. He's sitting right across from me, not on screen today. And then Steph, who's a program specialist and leads the book club, is also right next to me. We are broadcasting in from a TRF team retreat, and we're actually with our beloved leaders, Bessel and Leisure, at their place in Massachusetts. So they aren't on screen, but they're working furiously to bring this experience to you. And now to introduce our book club moderator, Frederick. He is, he's actually been with us since the season 1, where we read The Body Keeps the Score, and continued with us as a panelist and is now here as a moderator. So it's something that we really love when community members are continuing with us on our journey. So Frederick Mann, for over 20 years, has worked with diverse populations and professions directly and indirectly as a teacher, an administrator, a consultant, researcher. He worked as a clinical referral coordinator and trainer at the Child Trauma Training Center in the Department of Psychiatry at UMass Chan Medical School. He's provided assistance and referral support for families, clinicians, educators, and other professions throughout the state of Massachusetts, and also trained and facilitated workshops in how to understand trauma, identify trauma triggers and responses, and effectively support and aid children who have experienced trauma. He's also held roles as an outpatient clinician and school liaison for Community and Mental Health Agency and Family Resource Center. He's also worked directly with families and children impacted by impaired caregivers due to drug addictions, mental illness, incarceration, immigration barriers, and violence. Frederick's facilitated both group, individual, couple, sibling, and family therapy sessions based on clinical needs, and has also led parent trainings and father support groups, specialized workshops for special needs and disabled children. Very, very impressive human, obviously. So welcome, Frederick. Thank you so much for being here with us again. And I'll just share really quickly a little bit about myself, is that I'm typically based out in Northern California. I have been with TRF for the last year and really passionate about building programs and teams and organizations to create communities and healing and connection. That my work is inspired from my own experiences in trauma, and I had founded a nonprofit called the Trauma Project in 2020, where I raised $20,000 to create community and peer level trauma programs and resources. And that actually led me to finding the TRF team, where I love working with today. So welcome, everyone. Frederick, would you like to share anything before we start?
I just want to say welcome, and it's a pleasure to continue to work with you, but also to meet the wonderful participants today. I'm excited about this conversation. Everyone looks wonderful, but I am just so excited to hear your perspective of this book. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Frederick. And we will have a little share from one of our panelists, Priscilla, who's joining us from the Prison Yoga Project. Maybe a little bit into the program, she can share a little bit with us about the Prison Yoga Project. They are one of the Trauma Research Foundation's alliance members, where we bring together like-minded and mission-aligned organizations and kind of support them in what their programming is. And we've developed a wonderful partnership with them for this season. So welcome, Priscilla. Okay, well, here we go. I'm going to share with you a slides. I hope there we go. Okay, just some quick notes before we dive in is, do please remember to take care of yourself, that we are discussing difficult topics, and that we do want to make sure that everyone's keeping a good eye on what you're feeling, what's going on with your body, and if things are arising, to remember you can always take a pause, have some water, maybe stretch, feel into your body, ground your feet, take some deep breaths. And a really good thing is, even if you feel like you're having experience, taking a look around and maybe naming some senses, something that you're feeling, like your jacket on you, or the feel of the air, or something that you smell, something that you hear, but just some exercises to keep us in our body. Okay, so let's kick it off with our first question. Let me come back to my screen share. Sorry about that. Okay. So just to share 3 salient points, if you all haven't also accessed, we do have a free study guide that's downloadable on our website. This is something taken from our study guide. So part 2, the middle passage, 3 salient points to review. Chris did not trust his lawyer and felt pressure to stay strong and maintain his innocence. 2, Chris's father was murdered in November of 1996, and their last conversation was an argument over the phone a few days prior to his death. And 3, Chris was sentenced to life in prison and immediately placed in a segregation unit. So we'll kick it off, and also just want to say big thank you to Chris and his team, and Chris for really everything that he has worked through in writing a book for us to be able to be with him on his journey and learn. Patrick, do you want to kick it off with question 1?
Yes. What are your thoughts on the sentencing process and the lack of information provided to Chris about his options prior to the trial? So let me just say it again. What are your thoughts on the sentencing process and the lack of information provided to Chris about his options prior to his trial? So please just raise your hand and let us know. I'm really curious. I've been wrestling with this book for a while, so I just can't wait to see how others have thought about it.
And Keita's hand is raised.
Keita, please. Oh, please. Keita.
Hello?
Yes. Tell me your thoughts. We can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
My immediate visceral response is that, well, of course, if we go throughout the book and his journey, right, inmate number so and so, inmate with like that whole dehumanizing, the whole stripping of power. So the sentencing process and the lack of information is consistent with that, right? Like that to me is like a real starch observation. So I'll leave it at that and see what other people have to say.
So what I hear you saying, it just seems so obvious of how it happened, and it's not a surprise. And I'm curious of what is it about it that makes it not a surprise? Like, it's like, yeah, of course this happens. Okay, I see multiple hands. If you want to come back to circle around, we can. But I'm just curious of what is it about it that is not a surprise? You said, of course. So you want to I give you a few minutes to think about it, but I'd love to hear you circle back. Okay, is it okay? Okay. Charles.
Yeah, so I think what comes up for me is that the legal system really broadly shares a lot of similarities with like the medical system. I think is a system a lot of people have a lot of familiarity with, and that there's obscurity, there's complexity, and then there's incentive structures. And all of these things like interplay in ways that create enormous challenges for the actual person who is theoretically at the center of this system, which is in this case, someone getting sentenced. So I think that, I was reading, like Chris was talking about how he treated his lawyer like an enemy. And I think that says a lot about the incentives and the complexity of the system, that ultimately attorneys are, at the very least on the surface, they look a lot like people that are a part of the system. They're not, it's kind of difficult to treat them like an ally when they're also usually an older white man wearing a suit. They spend a lot more time talking with the judges and the prosecution authorities than you do. And they spend a lot more time talking to those people than they spend talking to you as a client. And so it's really hard to form a bond with this person who you are theoretically paying and trying to build trust with, and trying to trust that they are acting with your best interests in mind. And that's all that, a lot of that actually happens before even the moment when you speak with them. Like you already have that perception.
So there's this inherent challenges, or the elephant in the room, the inherent bias within the system. There could be an inherent structure of bias or challenge that makes it difficult to trust. Yeah, I hear that. Okay.
Not only the trust, but even to like engage with. Like they use all the same language as people that are also trying to prosecute you or are prosecuting you and persecuting you, that are trying to impact your life negatively. So the real difference is that, like, again, there's the idea that they are the ones working in your interest.
Right. Okay. So I'm gonna go back to Jacob, and then I'm gonna come back to Keita, and then we're gonna move forward. Yes, Jacob.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Charles said, where he talks about, the trust. And, you look at the medical system and the same thing. It's like everybody knows the same language and you do not know that language, yet you're the one who needs to be best informed. And we look at it from a therapist perspective. We always talk about we meet our clients where we're at. And the legal system does not. It's all about, the speed. How quickly can we get through the trial case? How quickly we get the sentencing and move on to the next client? There's no building a relationship, getting to understand what your options are, what the whole process is, and what each step of the way is. No, it's like he said, a lot of it happens before you even meet the client or meet your lawyer. They've already got most of your case already completed with the other team and the judge and everything else, and you're in the very last end of it. And how can you have trust or really have a full understanding if most of it's done behind the scenes and they're just rushing you through?
Wow. That's interesting, the inherent barriers or challenges even before you engage in the process, the deep process into the system. There are these inherent barriers or challenges. I know Keita was starting that. She said, of course, this is obvious. So I wanted to ask if you can add into it. And I know we're going to all have more conversation, but I just wanted to circle back to make sure we hear that. And I do see your hand, Deborah. And
Yes.
Hopefully we can go ahead.
Keita here. So
Keita, I'm sorry. Keita.
The industrial prison complex, right? It makes money, right? It really makes, it's a system that's punitive, that makes money on the backs of its prisoners. If you look at the bigger picture and the overrepresentation, particularly of Black and brown bodies in that goes into some of the things where we're hearing about this trust versus mistrust. So that's the pieces that we really have to get our head around. When I read this book, I work with people in the complex. And so it's really this system, and the pieces around the not preparing him or the sentencing is by design too. It's a psych game,
it's
right?
Designed. Okay.
Right. It's a psych game, right? To keep you inmate so and so and so, that number, that whole piece. So it's really, you have to keep it in its true concept. It's not about rehabilitation. Maybe at one point we kind of had that in the system. But as you can see, particularly in this book, whenever somebody tries to do something positive and make a moving forward, right, it gets shut down. So that's all that just goes back to the complex and what it's really about. So I'll step back.
And what I hear you saying, it is designed that way. It's not, you shouldn't be surprised, because it's everything are interconnected to function the way that it functions. I know Deborah has her hand up, and I think we're only able to do one more, but I want to check with Teresa, and then we will remember for the next round. But Deborah, can we just have one more, and then we're going to move on? I'm sorry, but there's so many juicy questions, so we're going to really get into it. So yes, Deborah.
Oh, I thought you were saying put your hand down because we're moving on. Okay, no, as somebody that has worked in the court, as I was a juvenile case manager, when someone comes in, there is so much time that is necessary to be able to connect with the person that you are working with that is just not there. It's kind of like what Charles was saying, and I think what Jacob was saying as well is like, you've got so much time on the docket, right? And so you only have so much time to see your patient or your client, or like for me, my kiddo, right? And so it's very disheartening when you do show up as that person that does want to help, but you're also seen as the enemy, because of the system that is in place. The judge is here, and the person that is in front of the judge is here. Everything is set up for that person to fail. And so when you are the person that's like, hey, I really do want to hear your side, at least some of my experience was, what are you going to do for me? And then it takes that time. It takes that time to build that relationship. And luckily I was able to have it with the juveniles that I was working with. And some of them did finally trust me and believe me, but the amount of time that it takes, it is a lot. And that's what's unfortunate, is that it is a system and they get moved through very quickly, unfortunately.
Wow. That is such a powerful insight, and the insights that everyone has just shared. And I am grappling, and I'm gonna pass it to Teresa, is what do we do when things are structured and designed to be inequitable? Like, what happens? How can one individual navigate a structural inequality, a system that is designed for them to fail, designed for them not to make it out? Not that we're going to answer this question right now, but it just poses that question. What do we do? Are there ways that we fight it? Are there ways to move out of it when it's structurally designed for us to not succeed, or someone not to succeed? Teresa.
Thank you, Frederick. Yeah, really beautiful way to open everything up, and a really big question that I feel like, I don't know, reading this book through and continuously feeling that sense of like, here's another barrier, here's another obstacle, here's just yet another way that the system is in place. And, it's something I was thinking about today was, how is it that we can be here to celebrate the immense amount of resilience and strength that Chris exhibits, and also to acknowledge, can this be possible to ask of every single person? I mean, the amount of trauma that existed in his life and what he's had to come through in order to get to where he is today, it's just how much of that is possible. And it's a really amazing example. And yet, the real side of that is these are real aspects of the system that are very difficult to overcome. So to share some input from our audience joining in virtually is along these same lines is Jess A saying, it really goes to show that not much has changed in the way the process is, and that should be alarming to many. Amy shares, it feels so symbolic of the system that is so very broken and inhumane. Jess A again shares 80%, since Jess is dialing in from Alaska. She shares 80% of those currently incarcerated in our carceral system in Alaska are unsentenced. And lastly, from Jen, this is one of the significant reasons we all are called to do this work, the dehumanizing treatment of those experiencing incarceration and the systems enforcing justice that just build the barriers. So thank you to everyone who's tuning in. I'm seeing people from Wisconsin, the UK, Minneapolis, Kentucky, Birmingham, Alaska, New Hampshire. So thanks so much for being with us, and just continue to drop in your comments and reflections as we go on. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. Question number 2, which is, how do you think the death of Chris's father impacted his state of mind and ability to make a statement during the trial? So one more time is, how do you think the death of Chris's father impacted his state of mind and ability to make a statement during the trial? Any thoughts? Achara, please share.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. You know, no matter if we have amicable relationships with parents or they end the way that the last words ended that Chris had with his father, right? It's going to affect us when we're standing in front of a bunch of people who are judging us. And we're already in a state of sympathetic nervous response, if we want to go there, right? And we're activated, and it truly is our life on the line. At least our nervous system understands it that way. And in this case, it really was. And so it makes sense that the impact of his father would, you know, bring a part of him that wants to try to justify, or in his words, you know, silly and a lie and what he said that day. And he was also quite young, right? And what we know about neurobiology and our brain and so forth, still developing then. You know, I have a 14-year-old son, and when I catch him just even doing such a small infraction, you know, he justifies and rationalizes because he doesn't want to disappoint me. And there has to be a part of us, and I'm sure, you know, there's a part of the author that really was just in a state of sort of discombobulated confusion, and I'm trying to hold it together. And because we can't really say how we feel in a moment like that. And all we're trying to do is get out of this box. What can I do to get out of this? And so I, you know, again, no matter what relationship we have, whether it's a great one or it's a one that's, you know, disruptive and antagonistic, it's going to affect our state of mind and our belonging and our worth and our esteem and all of those things that really, you know, sort of society tells makes us, you know, what considers you human, right? So it affects our attachment, it affects all of those things. And so in that precise moment, in a split second, all that's going around in our bodies and our minds. So I think it impacted him greatly.
Thank you, Tara. Yeah, you know, I wonder if anyone want to share what do you think would have happened had what would his statement would have been had he not had that news, you know, sharing the other side of that. But Priscilla, I would love to hear from you.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, a lot of the points that Chada made was similar to mine. You know, this is another traumatic instance that Chris felt along the way of so much trauma that he grew up in. And through reading the book, at this point, there was never any time for Chris to heal those traumas, to discharge the energy in his body. So I feel like he was already in a heightened state. You know, he was out of his window of tolerance. And so, you know, it was just like another thing that happened to him. And, you know, towards the end or in the book, their relationship didn't seem like a fantastic or a great one. But Chris, he loved his father. He wanted his father's love. And this is another person that left him. Maybe he felt, you know, what happened to Chris's father was awful, but maybe there was a sense of abandonment when he had such a small group, a small circle already. And that circle was just getting smaller and smaller. And there was nothing he could do about it. So I feel like that definitely would have had a major impact. And now he's in this trial where he doesn't trust his lawyer. Obviously, he's not going to trust the judge, the system. He's got no one backing him up, or he feels like he has no one backing him up. So I can only imagine, you know, the sense of loneliness or, you know, just not having anyone, no support group in that moment.
Yeah, thank you, Priscilla. Yeah, I'm hearing from a number of people's comments. It's kind of, how can we really see the amount of compounding trauma that is continuing throughout Chris's life? And, you know, the last session, we were talking about a lot that happened in his early childhood. And so as we think about that already having happened, and now in this part where he's coming into the system, even though there are all these complex relationships, but a death is a death is a death. I like that someone had said, regardless of what that relationship was, that's grief sitting massively in the system. And on top of everything else, it's remarkable just to think about what that then means when we're standing in front of a decision that's about to potentially change our lives.
Mhm.
Thank you, Priscilla. Did you want to share, a little bit from your perspective on working with the Prison Yoga Project? Anything that comes up from that lens, or also just share a little bit about your work from the Prison Yoga Project?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm the operations manager with Prison Yoga Project. And I've been with them for almost 2 years now, and definitely have learned so much about trauma response, healing, and all of that. And it's just great. So if for those watching, if you're not familiar with Prison Yoga Project, we are a worldwide organization, and we bring yoga into facilities, prisons, jails, and other system impacted organizations to offer yoga, and we offer it with the trauma lens and an accessibility lens. And our goal is to help someone find the tools within themselves to take that moment before reacting, an embodied approach. And we serve a lot of folks who are incarcerated, and something might happen and the instinct is to react. And so our hope with offering these kinds of healing modalities of yoga and mindfulness and embodiment is to be able to have that breath before acting, that moment, that pause. And then I'll also share that we are a partner with Trauma Research Foundation. And after this book club session, we are also offering a workshop, and that is on September 16th, 2 p.m. Western Time, PDT. And you can check us out. I believe someone from your team already dropped our link in the chat. And we're so honored for this partnership and to be included. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Priscilla. Yeah, and just in that workshop to note that it's along the lines of what we've just been talking about, which is how to learn to recognize trauma, including signs of vicarious trauma in the context of incarceration, and that it will reflect on the connection between ACEs, early adverse childhood experiences, and future incarceration, and the trauma experienced by incarcerated people and those who also work in the system. And there'll be, a reflection on what does it really look like to interact with an entire system that's imbued with trauma. So I would welcome all of you to join. Okay, well, thank you all so much for those shares, and a quick share and reflection from our virtual audience is Pearl saying, "We don't know how to grieve and honorably express negative feelings that stay trapped inside us and come out sideways to bring about more pain and trauma and feelings of incompetence." Thank you, Pearl. Shall we move to the next question, Frederick?
Well, first, I want to just say I am excited. This is really, I am appreciating your reflection, and we're going to bring in more voices. And please, thank you for just being present in this moment. This is so insightful. The next question is, how does the absence of social interaction impact one's well-being? How does the absence of social interaction impact one's well-being? So, Keita, please share.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation to step into the circle. So we all have our own schemas and ideologies and things that are running in our head. We can call it tapes, whatever. So if we think of this in the context of Chris, in the context of prison, in the context of being disconnected from people, but also then in the prison, he was also moving through some of his rehashing some of the things that was happening in life. And he only had himself
Mm-hmm.
to like bounce some of those things off.
Mhm.
And not to say good or bad, just saying that's the schema and the lens, right? And so that's why isolation, solitary confinement can be it's really torturous piece when we don't have that connection to people, which means even to be able to know that there's another human being nearby, to be able to have engagements with someone, to just be able to say, yes, that's right, or this is not right. Oh yeah, I hear what you're saying. Some of that that type of connection, that back and forth. And so when you don't have that, you have your own self. And I think about this in the psyche as he was trying to deconstruct or understand some of the choices he had made, some of the things he was happening with his family, the
Right.
systems, the community in which he lived in.
Mhm.
So he needed that. And he continued, we talked about the resiliency. He needed that connection, we all do, to help bounce that back off and land us, sort of say, ground us, maybe in perspectives even that we hadn't considered. So I'll step back.
I appreciate that in terms of understanding that the human interaction is really critical for processing connections, grounding, and to be able, and also it sounds like you're saying clarifying, or at least being able to pull it out of oneself, one's mind. Charles, what would you like to say around this? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I think during my incarceration, I think, and we see this with Chris as well in a really poignant way, but like during my incarceration, of all the deprivations that I experienced, having also done some time in solitary, surprisingly, it was not deprivations around high quality food or like going out at night and like seeing the stars or the ability to go where I wanted in physical space. It was the lack of what I felt of social connection. That was the most dehumanizing and the most impactful day to day. And I think that Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I'm not a frequent quoter of, but he said that what we really all want is to feel connected to the goings on of the world around us. And that was what was most striking to me in terms of what like impacted my emotional experience. And I think you see that in Chris as well when he talked about, I read a lot into that moment when he finds a friend who is willing to challenge him, just like having someone moment to moment who's willing to be a reflection for you, willing to engage with you at a meaningful level that is incredibly lacking in the prison system. Surface level conversations and interactions abound. And there's actually a surprising amount of politeness at times, even while it's an incredibly violent place. Like people are going to hold the door open for you and say thank you and be very mindful in that way. But true connection is, you're absolutely starved for it. And so that difference of just getting to experience yourself as a human and being seen that way is, I think, impossible to overstate.
And I think that's really interesting. You were saying this is a deeply human experience, regardless of someone being in prison or not, just to have the personal engagement with someone, to interact and to help you see yourself, to be a mirror, is deeply human. It's a deeply human need, and not just someone in prison or all that. That's really, really interesting. I know there's a lot of great hands up. I don't know how to do this. Do I do any, mini, miny, mo? But so I want to tell you, if I can't get everybody in this one, Teresa's definitely going to do it. We're gonna work on I'm making a list. But Akra, I want to make sure if I said your name correctly.
Achara.
Actra. Yes, please. Can you join into the conversation? And we're going to try to pull everyone in as much as we can. And Teresa, you let me know with the timing as well. Okay, cool.
Yeah, couple things. That study that came about, I can't think of it right off the top of my head, but I'm sure all of you guys at TRF will remember. But about, what about babies and when they were left to cry and that nobody came and they just kind of learned and stopped. And so this social connection thing is even, it's pre-verbal, right? It's pre-birth, right? Like it goes back. I know when I was pregnant with my kids, we connect. Studies have shown that, health of the baby is better and all of those things. I mean, even with plants, right? socially connect, living things, right? That need oxygen and connection. And I'm thinking of, Dr. Gabor Mate, when he talks about, interacting with children, and when they get upset, our thing is to send them to their room. And, that's teaching them being angry is not okay, and your behavior is not okay. And so we're going to disconnect from you, detach from you, not even for a short period of time, but until you act right, instead of going, okay, what's really going on here? What's the need that's not being met? How can we actually engage in curiosity and hold space for each other? And me too. And I come from an Asian background, so there's very much a hierarchy, right? And so the system that I work with here, the local county jail and the ministries I work with here, there's a system, and everybody gets the system. I really relate to them on the system. And what I've tried to bring is the mindfulness of how, yes, I understand we're trying to keep everybody safe, and that's the first and foremost priority. But at the same time, can we do that? How can we get curious to do that in a way that doesn't dehumanize people? And one of the ways we can do that is, how do we still find connection with each other, with these people that are coming in? I asked a question the other day. We were in a meeting, and I said, how many people are being released a week? And they're like 70 a week. And they have no idea where these people are going. And so we're trying to create programs and housing and things so that they still have that connected piece, right? From before and after, and not just during. It's this well-being, this question about connectedness and well-being is so important, because the absence of it lets people, sort of leaves us thinking, oh, it's just me, I'm the problem. I know when I come into situations with other people, it's like, oh, you're experiencing that too? I'm not just the alien here. And that is so important to know that, oh, okay, all right, I've got my situations and my issues, yeah, but I'm not the only one, and I'm not alone in this. So.
Wow. I want to say it's that's powerful in terms of the connections, the dehumanization. But what does it mean when the system is designed to dehumanize and to harm in ways in which that are extremely devastating by cutting off a natural need? Jacob, you're the last one that I could call on, because we have to go to the next question. But I just know we just have just a few minutes, but Jacob, jump into this conversation. And I want to apologize for all that we couldn't get in, but the next question is yours.
And I really want to jump back to what Keita said, one little piece, and I can jump into that last part where you're talking about, when it's designed to alienate people and dehumanize them. So Keita mentioned a really good point, and it hits home for me, is that, I'm, for the most part, I'm an introvert. I don't go out, I don't have a lot of friends, I'm a very social person. But I have friends, like I do custom woodworking, just them being in the garage with me. We don't say a single word for hours on end. Just knowing they're there to share the moment and the experience is more powerful than any conversation they could try to spark up. Just having that human presence to connect with. As far as the dehumanizing, it's, coming from the military, there's the military's motto is we break you down to your nothing, and we build you to the person we want. And some parts of it is control. If you're, when you're military maneuvers, it's we all act in unison. We all act in the same mindset and manner. Where you look at the prison system, it's not that way. It's, I'm going to destroy you so you feel so worthless and like you're nothing. Because in that moment, if you have no self-worth, no self-value, you're easier to manipulate and control in any given moment. And then if it does come time to release, what kind of person are they anymore? If they spent the last, however many years in that mindset where they are nothing, they are worthless, and they're just there to be controlled the easiest way possible, how can we properly release them without a lengthy rehabilitation program?
Wow. This has been so fascinating, and it's left me with interesting questions. If someone has been subjugated to a structural system that has focused on breaking them down, and if they're able to transition from that system not broken down in the way that it was supposed to, what type of resilience and agency was required in order to be able to to do that? And what does that mean? And I know Teresa said that already before. So it's left me with many interesting questions to ponder. But we have many more to go. So Teresa, take us to the next question in the next stage of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Frederick. Yeah, just a quick share from our virtual audience that is noting many of the comments that have happened with all of our panelists, but Pearl sharing that the absence of social interaction has been used historically as a form of torture, similar to what Jacob was talking about. And just sharing that there's research out there that shows that when one has that support system, it helps with positive post-release outcomes to include lower recidivism rates and mental health challenges. And this is something that a number of people started to touch on, is really that the peer, this is Deborah shared this in our panelist chat. You all can't see it online, but she shared, this is why peer work needs to happen before people are released. And also sharing, Chris found his mentors inside and also became one. And that, that's definitely, it feels like such a major portion of his journey and his continued journey is the allies that and mentors that he really found and was able to continually go back to at different parts in his journey. And that, as many people said, if we're in a system that really breaks down the human to human interaction, and instead of making it to be a positive experience, but to be the enemy, the negative experience, that human relationships is where the trauma comes from, that human relationships is what gets you into trouble, so that all that isolation is happening, that if we're not working on really repairing that, the core traits of being human and surviving, which is relating with other people, and that when trauma happens in relationships, that's what starts to break down. If we're not repairing that beforehand, then what is that like when people exit the system? So yeah, really, really beautiful, amazing conversation. So I'll move on to our fourth question, which is, if the prison therapist thought Chris should be on suicide watch, why didn't he receive more mental health support? And again, if the prison therapist thought Chris should be on suicide watch, why didn't he receive more mental health support? Well, that's just, man, there are so many there outside of just, well, the system is just really messed up. But Jacob, go ahead.
I mean, I think this question goes back to what we've kind of been hitting on this whole time, is that we already know that they don't care about these people. And the goal for them is to completely dehumanize them. So investing money in that kind of area, they want to do that. So again, the goal should be, to reacclimate them, to, support them while they're there, and to build them and to create reform. But the reality is they're not, when someone goes into prison, the goal is actually keep them there as long as possible. The longer they stay, the more money that prison gets. And you see it time and time and again. So, just saying that they should be on suicide watch, we have to look at multiple things. Do they actually care enough? Does the prison system itself, the employees there, actually care? And then lastly is funding. A lot of these are privatized, or the public ones are so lack of funded that they can't afford the amount of staff they need to create proper mental health care inside the facility.
Yeah, definitely. Incentive, privatized incentive, the intention of actually breaking them down internally. Yeah. Deborah, would you like to share?
Yes. Well, and it's going off of what he just said. This is why advocacy matters so much. I mean, like advocacy, even within a space that somebody has someone speaking up for them, I mean, that you have, and that's the thing with Chris, like his whole family was just like, yeah, you made a choice, you did something bad. Now, like, we're cutting you off, and you're going to pay for your mistakes, right? The things that you chose to do. And so that's what just kind of comes to my mind, is that everybody in there is just on their own, right? There's just no one speaking up. And even somebody that is coming in that maybe did have somebody on the outside, like, how do they get to speak up for their loved ones? There's no real advocacy or way to, unless the other thing that comes to my mind is the squeaky wheel gets oiled, right? But there's a lot of times where there is just complete division between the person that has just gone in, right? You have a certain amount of time to be processed. You have a certain amount of time before you are able to be in contact with loved ones. And so you're just kind of flapping in the breeze on your own. And I mean, the thing that came to my mind too, before Jacob even started speaking, was, well, you know what? They got themselves into this mess. They're just going to have to deal with it on their own. And unfortunately, there's just not a lot of caring for as many people as are coming in. That's why diversion is also so important, right? That people are actually getting the mental health care that they need and not just being placed in our prisons. So that's what I have to say on that.
Thank you, Deborah. And we have time for one or two more. Keita?
Hi. So I was just writing this down. I think this is another example of also the therapist in this role, like as gatekeeper, but also the internalized oppression of the system that's in the therapist that's acting out through the system too, right? Like we've heard throughout, like their perception of what they thought he is doing or not or whatever. So there's that internalized oppression too. And I think it's really important to mention, I've been in these systems as a caseworker, clinical community therapist, where you want to do some things and things, whatever the reason is, limited. And so now you're in this position and you start to believe, right, the construct of what it's telling you. And so I want to keep my job. I'll be a good gatekeeper. And besides, I really don't believe that you can do this anyway. Everyone already said it. So I just wanted to echo that. That's another example of how people in the system also internalize.
Wow, I'm so glad you brought that up. And I don't know if it's in this part of the book or the next one, but something I was really shocked about was his parole officer. I could not believe the things that he was sharing, the parole officer saying, especially when his mom passed away, that I really just thought about what pain is within that parole officer to project out onto Chris and say, you did this is your fault. And it would be, I even was thinking, I was like, gosh, I wish we could interview that parole officer and get a sense, and also with COs, and get a sense what's going on within their bodies and their system and their projections and their experiences that are coming out onto the incarcerated populations that are their own vicarious trauma or even direct trauma coming out. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Charles, you've had your hand up. We'll take this as the last one.
Yeah, I guess just one thing I'll say from my experience is that yes, people within the prison system, correctional officers, people that are part of the healthcare element of prisons, like, are also just in an incredibly bad state. Like they also do prison time in a very real way. And sometimes it's hard to have empathy or sympathy for them, but like, oh dear God, their suicide rates are enormous. Like they live very traumatized lives, and that shows up. And it's a horrible, fascinating social experiment that we are living as part of our society and making them be a part of the prison system. So I guess I'll just say, regarding like mental health versus suicide watch in a system, I think this again gets back to incentives for me. Like, not letting people kill themselves is the goal of the prison system, because that involves paperwork and costs and questions and like accountability they don't want to have. That is a world apart from improve the mental health and lives and outcomes of the people in prison. Those things are actually not related. We want them to be related because I think as people looking at this holistically, we see that they're related. They're not related in the prison system because they have no incentive to improve people's lives. And so, and this is something that I experienced again while in solitary confinement and otherwise, that you build a system in which people are trying to just follow the rules they've been told to follow. And for COs, that's like, don't let people kill themselves, check these boxes, do these things that are incredibly important. And I think about this a lot in organizational design in companies, that like process and rules never survive people just not giving a shit. Like, you can create an incentive structure, but if people refuse to care, you cannot create a process that makes them care unless you're very particular. And one example of this that really comes to mind to me is that at some point in the past, Congress created a law that like tuberculosis shots just like had to be given to every inmate. And like, man, I got TB shots like every 6 months when I changed prisons, because there was just some law that they would be absolutely pounded into the ground if they didn't give a shot. And so again, I think what's fascinating here is you look at a group of people that we would like to think are incentivized to think about the problem holistically, but they are also part of an incredibly inhumane system of checking off boxes. Like, they are not paid to treat people holistically. And so of course they won't do that.
Yeah, wow, that's powerful. Thank you, Charles, for that perspective. Okay, well, we'll continue on. I just want to share a comment from our online audience, Amy, saying, his life was not valued, but it was valued by him, and that is part of how he overcame. The tears shed reading this book. Get up and push forward against insurmountable odds. Who can do this? Thank you, Amy. Okay, on to our next question. Frederick?
Yes. So our next question, how could we expand the resources of the rehabilitation programs and ensure they are upheld to appropriate standards? How could we expand the resources of the rehabilitation programs and ensure they are upheld to their appropriate standards? And I would love to hear your comments. As we think about this, I want to add that if we look at other countries around the world, such as Finland, where their treatment of people who are incarcerated are very different in their beliefs about people's sense of agency and resources and access. And I just wonder how these practices come to be, that in some countries people have freedom of movement, they have healthcare that are really humane. In other countries it is not, and I'm curious about it. But Priscilla, let's start with you today, right now.
Thank you, Frederick. Something that was very noticeable to me when Chris was doing really well is, the facility, the CEOs, they began to trust him. And so him and Steve got their own tier, and they got to cook and walk around. And like, that seems like when he was able to flourish the most. And I mean, there's this whole book that we're reading right now that shows an example of how positive programs can be. So for other facilities that have 0 programs or really difficult, it's like, read this book, look at other facilities that have programs where the population is doing better. They're doing actual rehabilitation, they're growing, they're becoming positive members of the community. And we have there's a prison yoga project program in San Diego, and on one of the yards it sounds very similar to this 4th tier, because folks who go there, they go voluntarily because they want to better themselves. And that yard, I haven't gone, but one of our facilitators goes, and he's astonished. Everyone's kind of walking around doing their own thing. There's such a positive vibe and environment. There's tons of programs on that yard. And it's just, for the other facilities, look at these other facilities and yards that are doing well, that are seeing successful rates, and also allow us to take data. There's not a lot of data on recidivism, at least in our programs. It's really difficult to get data on that. So start with looking at other facilities in other places, as you mentioned, other countries, look at what they're doing, make a model and try it out. Allow the organizations to take data, pre-surveys, post-surveys, follow-ups. It's frustrating because there are good examples, and it feels like the system just doesn't want to follow it.
And Priscilla, just to our wonderful media manager was inquiring, from your perspective with Prison Yoga Project, and also being the operations manager, how do you see these programs being different? Is it as you enter into different countries, more easy to come in, more accepting, less accepting? What's that experience been like?
Yeah, definitely. So in the US, there's a goal that, what we're offering as part of actual rehabilitation. So we feel like these facilities or the state governments should be pitching in at least, because we have facilitators that go in and sometimes they have to drive really far and it's difficult, and we want everyone involved being compensated appropriately. And not all our programs are like that. A lot of them are still volunteer based, and that makes it difficult to have ongoing programs. But there are other countries. One of them that comes up for me is Sweden. We have a fairly large program over there, and it seems to be welcomed. Forgive me if I'm saying the wrong country, or area. I think in the Netherlands, we had a program where we went in to facilitate yoga with the COs, because they saw that as something that's necessary. Because as everyone has mentioned, the CEOs, the administration, the people working the system inside, they're just as traumatized, or they experience trauma as well. And they can come from the similar backgrounds, so this offering of rehabilitation, obviously for the folks inside, but it really needs to be a system-wide. It needs to be a system-wide impact. Everyone has so much trauma and it's stuck in the body, and it needs to find a way to be released. We also have programs in Mexico, and something that I found that was interesting was during COVID, a lot of our programs in the US just went on pause. But here, I'm actually in Mexico City right now, and the programs here relatively quickly moved to Zoom. And I joined in a couple times, and it's just so amazing to see. They've got their camera, the facilitators have their cameras over here, and I just joined in as a visitor, and it obviously makes a huge impact. And that's something else, if things come up like shutdowns, like we just went through with the pandemic, how willing are these facilities? How willing are they to help change it to a virtual thing? Or do they just say, oh, we're shut down, see you guys when we're back open, So that's another thing, that like, how willing is a facility?
Wow. This is so insightful for me. I know we have a lot of hands up, but Deborah, would you add on to some of these comments?
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to peers and kind of bounce off of what Priscilla said. Like the organization that I work with, we have reentry peers that they have the lived experience of having been incarcerated. So they understand what somebody is going through. We've got organizations. I'm in Austin, Texas. So there's some organizations here that go, like she's saying, go do yoga within the prisons that are showing people, okay, so once you get out, we're here to kind of like catch and pick up so that you're not just isolated, right? There's peer organizations like I'm with Recovery ATX. And so we've got all kind of peers in recovery. And so it's like, if you're needing connection here, we'll help you with that. If you're looking for resources, housing is a huge problem here. And so being able to help with that, and not just feel like, the way that you see it in the movies, that you walk out a gate with a little bag and there's nothing there. I think that that's another piece of being able to engage with people while they are still incarcerated, to see you're going to have some bridges once you come out to be able to help and to filter and to have someone alongside you that has done this too. And it's very similar to Chris and his mentorship program, like seeing the people that are wanting to move forward and move past, even with a life sentence, y'all. I mean, he was saying, okay, you know what? I'm going to do what I can right now where I am. And for anyone that has moved out of those gates to be able to go back in, I mean, to me, that's like hugely empowering. And it shows people you matter, because that's one of the things that I see. I'm also a licensed drug offender educator. So I see people that they're just like, nobody really cares about me. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't matter to anybody. And so when you can say, and it kind of goes back to when I was a juvenile case manager, like trying to say, like, I want to be able to be that person that can bridge something for you somewhere. And I think that reentry peers really create that opportunity to say, okay, I walked out the gate, I'm coming back in to grab you by the hand and bring you with me when you're able to move forward through the gate.
Yeah, thank you so much. And this is such a great question for all of us. And what I hear is that we are very clear, there are resources and within the system that work, and that we need to recognize it and really continue to expand it versus to not allow them to take place. But in addition to within the system, when people transition out of incarceration, there are practices and ways in which people need to have that positive infrastructure to help them not only know that they matter, but be empowered to have success. Because of the second time, we're going to do two more. I want to ask Charles to jump in and share from some of your insights. What have been resources that you have found meaningful and helpful? I don't know if any of you know that there's been a lot of controversy in terms of removing books out of systems and removing courses and education opportunities because those were considered luxuries. I'm not for sure of other items, even during the early part of COVID, deciding who should get vaccinated and who shouldn't have access. So these questions are very much present and real. People are constantly wondering, what are people deserving to have and what are people not allowed to have? But Charles, would you please share your insights?
So, I mean, even just skimming, let alone reading the parts of the book that I did, I have just been unbelievably struck by the relative depth of resources that Chris had access to. So people should know the difference between the state and the federal system is pretty wide. Like, obviously you're incarcerated in both, but states can be, the variance in the experience state to state can be wild. On average, it's hard to say, but people in the federal system, they look at the state prison system and say that it's probably, worse as far as some of the experiences, but also much richer in terms of the availability of services and benefits. Like, if you're in a good state prison, you're probably way better off than any federal prison system specifically, as well as many states. It is utterly purgatorial. Like, programming, laughable. Access to books, or I mean, really anything you can think of, like, workout equipment, books, computers, programming, skill development, non-existent, like utterly laughable. And it has been dropping precipitously in the past 25 years in the federal prison system. And so I think that when I think about opportunities for like any kind of programming or betterment, what really comes to mind for me is that the most impactful thing we can do as a society to improve the experience of people in prison is to support direct engagement from third-party like nonprofits and systems. Like, for God's sakes, do not try to give the prison system more money. They will not utilize it. They will fight tooth and nail for decades to not have to spend the money, to not have to create meaningful programming. Those are not the people that should be given more responsibility. What we need to do is support direct engagement with prisons by outside groups. That is the most impactful use of time and money. So things like the Prison Yoga Project, but whatever else it may be, like, get colleges directly engaged with prisons, get external job programs directly engaged with prisons, get people physically into the prison from outside that world.
Wow, that was a helpful insight around advocacy. Support external groups who will do the work, because where the money will go. All right.
don't try to create laws in that where the prisons are required to rehabilitate. Prisons will never rehabilitate people. That's not their job. They don't know how to do it. It's anathema to their entire function.
Interesting. Teresa, I know we are at time, so I have to transition over to you. We have another great question ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for that really important question. And it's really also just, again, a shout out to Prison Yoga Project and their work as, a third-party nonprofit organization that is doing the work. So from our virtual audience, we have Steve Thomas sharing. Instead of asking what is wrong with someone, we should ask, what have you experienced? The goal should be to provide positive interventions to address trauma and other mental health challenges. And then from Pauline, does the system see inmates as individuals who are potential future citizens or guilty commodities in need of paying back for their past? The position taken influences programs and approaches offered. Yeah, it's such a, it's interesting. We can spend a lot of time really trying to figure out the programming, and it's also, how do we just change the underlying assumptions that are made, held in society and in these systems. And this kind of also just applies to our general mental health and healthcare modality, which is, instead of trying to take care of illness, which is an incentive of our system and of and many corporations that want to keep taking care, want to ensure the existence of illness so that they can take care of them, versus how do we flip that model and say, actually, let's invest into taking care of our health and wellness. So it really is multi-layered to really think about how do we change up this entire way of thinking and approach. So our last question that we have time for today, which this time always just goes by so fast, and I think this will be a really great question, is what are your thoughts on individuals who have not reached adult age receiving life sentences? I don't know if anyone has any figures on this too, of how many people are receiving life sentences that have not reached adult age. But again, what are your thoughts on individuals who have not reached adult age receiving life sentences? Okay, Keita, I think I saw your hand up first.
Yes, I think it's a complex question and issues. I think on the bottom line, if we're thinking about neurodevelopment and youth, then we have all the sciences that talks about the medicinal, the frontal cortex, and these things around decision making and impulsivity and some of these things. I think that those are the pieces that we want to look at. Like, we have a lot of these sentences now where we're trying people's adult. There's been some reverse in some states. I think Maryland had a reversal of that. But I think that this idea of children as adults has been problematic on so many levels, right? So I'm just going to step back and let someone else talk.
Yeah, thank you, Keita. Definitely lots to consider just in terms of our brain development. Achara?
Yeah, I was, this is really, really complex, right? Because I have a part of me that goes, their brains are still developing and so forth. And then I have another part that goes, well, you're a parent. So what if this happened to you? And what if this happened to you and your child was the one that committed the act, right? Versus your child was the one that suffered, was the victim in the situation. So there's a lot of conversation between my parts going on when we talk about this question. I know here locally, we had a situation where a young girl, her life was taken by another 14-year-old youth, right? And so it's in the process in the courts now, and there is a lot of chatter about it because, you know, the family wants life, right? But then the system wants this. And so to ask the question, you know, how do you feel about that? I don't personally have an answer, a solid one, if I'm being really open and honest with that, because I haven't sat with it long enough. I know the neuro part of me wants to go, absolutely, we shouldn't have life sentences for youth, right? But there's so much more to that question, and there's so much more to that answer than something just so, you know, black white. I think the sort of black white thinking, the A, B, the this and that, you know, plus minus thinking is why we're in the situation we're in the first place, right? This polarization. And so I'm trying to find the and in the answer in this, and I haven't located it yet.
Thank you for your honesty, Achara. Yeah, I can't remember what the percentage was. Maybe someone knows, but Chris saying at some point, the percentage, him saying that, yes, there are a percentage of people who are not ready to come back out of the system, but there are, I think it was like, you know, yes, maybe 30% are not ready. But there are this of people who have been life sentenced, and maybe there are the 60%. And what are we doing in order to actually help that 60%? Who had Jacob?
Yeah, I would say I don't agree with the license, you know, before adulthood. It was mentioned that, you know, their brains are still developing, and this is, you know, statistics, evidence, you know, science, that they are still developing. Then we also have to look at, you know, one of my biggest questions I always ask people is, you know, we spend so much time asking what's wrong with you versus what happened to you. You know, we have to take into consideration, where did they grow up? You know, like the book was talking about, you know, all of his life events that led up to that moment. You know, and if that's the whole life you've ever had, then rehabilitation can be an easy solution if we do it properly and we invest in the resources to make it happen. You know, because he's been influenced in the most crucial time of his life for being influenced in all the negative ways, in the worst ways possible, in the environment with his support system and everything. You know, be able to provide proper, you know, coaching and rehabilitation and services. I don't think a life sentence should be appropriate.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. I appreciate that opinion. Deborah.
Yeah, like when you asked the question, like my foot was shaking because it just makes me so angry. And I do appreciate, Achara, your honesty in saying, you know, it is hard, but a life sentence for a child is abhorrent. I mean, to even try a child as an adult, when the science is there, we know that the neural pathways are, and even now we're even seeing that it might even be further along than we even knew. It's like the systems always take a long time to catch up to the technology and the knowledge, right? It's just to try a child, especially a child that has grown up in a state with high ACEs, right? I mean, you even start to throw those questions in, and then you get the whole, you know, the what about questions. But these are really legitimate questions to be asking, because if you've got a child whose brain, you know, prefrontal cortex not fully developed and is responding with trauma responses, on top of that, it's not a it's not, I hate to use the word fair because nothing's fair in the system, right? But it's not appropriate. And a life sentence on top of just being tried as an adult, with what we know, to me is not appropriate.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. It's something that Bessel, what happened to us back then is now continually playing out in the now. That, you know, and what we know with the brain is that when cortisol's flooding, that our ability to timestamp the beginning and the end of an experience doesn't happen anymore. So that this emotional implicit memory continues to sit here. And so the idea that, you know, as a child who has had all of this trauma, still continuing to live out and had zero opportunity to work through that. And again, the compounding that we see throughout life, leading to then this one moment that even I think about, even I believe police officers that are trained, and they talk about having, having a point or trigger finger, that they have shown that in training, because they've been trained to do this, they're just automatically pulling. But so then if we think about all of that trauma that's sitting in our bodies that has not had a chance to actually process and become integrated, then leads to some sort of an action, because our brains are literally still living in that traumatic past, and now we're being sentenced for that. Yeah, it is really scary to think about what would the world be like if we were all on trial for things that our past traumas, are still living in our bodies, and what actions that is leading to. Charles, our last comment, and then would love to wrap up with a reflection from Frederick.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to keep it brief. I think I would even eliminate the element of life sentences for youth. I think the idea of a life sentence, the reality of that, is really the penultimate dehumanization in our system. And it kind of really gives the game away as to how we think about the people in the system, that it precludes the idea of change or of betterment. And it really is self-fulfilling that those people will never, on average, will not be capable of improvement, because they're being told by the system that their improvement is irrelevant to what they really want, which is a level of freedom and agency in their lives. And I say this acknowledging that there is a probably double-digit percentage of people that should never be in an uncontrolled environment free in society. They unfortunately are not capable of existing with the same level of freedom as the rest of us. I don't think it looks like prison, but it looks like something. But I just think that it says a lot about how we as a society, in America at least, think about retribution and think about our ability to better ourselves and one another. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that the fact that Chris presented himself in the world and acted in a way that he could actually achieve this is, I don't mean this as a criticism, but it's insanity. Like, the level of irrationality, the level of hope required to actually go through with this was not in any way supported by any experience around him. Like, you should have no belief that you could achieve this. So it's just crazy, literally. And that's what's required. And I think that's a really sad thing, that people are required to be crazy in order to better themselves and achieve things like this in prison.
Thank you, Charles. And I've been seeing Keita sharing some really wonderful thoughts. So I just want to, Keita, maybe you can close us out with your last thought.
So I was just saying that the social conditioning of violence and the acceptance of violence continues to be celebrated in America. And then I really wanted to, it feels like we shy away from, so I'm just going to bring the elephant in the room. And for one example, we could argue what I have witnessed due to the violence of white supremacy, for example, Black people in particular in our neighborhoods, in our communities, we become numb to violence. It becomes this necessary part of survival and even getting the props, right? And so I'm not saying this to be this inflammatory, like this is all, but it is the concept that is also buried into this narrative when we think about this picture of Chris and the system and the over representation of that. So just wanted to end with that.
Yeah, really, I appreciate that. We did have a question that was specifically touching upon speaking to the part in his experience, his response to the new inmate beatings and what that suggests about desensitization to violence. And even our experience, reading Chris's journey, it's how much of it have we become desensitized to, and what does that mean? So thank you all so much. We're at 3 minutes till closing out, and just want to give space to do last reflection. Overall, Frederick, do do you have anything you want to share just on to close out this part 2 of season 3?
Yeah. Well, just thank you everyone for just engaging in this really meaningful conversation. There are a few big ideas that I took from that. One was the importance of engagement, just being engaged to really understand what is actually happening within these systems that are invisible, complex, and sometimes distant from us, but how critical that people or advocates or just everyday citizens to have the curiosity and to profess the humanity of the people who have been removed from larger societies. That's one. But also the idea around how people can operate in a system and in some ways do as the system is structurally designed for them to do. So regardless of race and class, but if you're in this system and if it's designed a certain way, you can or likely perform. However, it takes extraordinary effort and drive to function in a different way, because it's like Chris did, and it's extraordinary and it's insanity, and it should never be required for someone to have to do that. But the last is that there is power in the advocacy of even the small acts of intentionality of groups like the Yoga Projects and others who continue to force the system to change within and outside the system. David versus the Goliath. I continue to hear that. David can always win as well, but it takes a lot of work. That's the bigger ideas that I'm hearing from this as we acknowledge the inequities and inequality, the structural, systematic process. There's still a David, or whoever you want to call it.
Thank you, Frederick, that reflection. And thank you, everyone tuning in with us from the virtual community. It's been really nice to have you all be an active part of today's discussion, and we've traversed a good number of topics, just mental wellness, isolation, rehabilitation, experience of COs and parole officers, and of course the overall injustice of the system. And just want to make sure that as we're getting ready to tune off, that we bring our awareness just to our bodies and how we're doing, because so much does come up, and to make sure we either stretch or go get a drink or take a walk after this so that we are caring for ourselves. And just a big thank you to today's panelists for showing up and talking with us. We all come from so many different walks of life and so many different experiences. And so it's really important to have a diverse array of opinions and voices being heard and expressed. So also know that it is a lot to ask for people to speak into these topics. And so applaud your time and attention and courage to show up and speak what's on your heart. And big thank you, of course, to the Trauma Research Foundation and the amazing teams that is here to put this on. It really takes a lot, from the Zoom, the registration, the website, the outreach, the affiliates, the communications, and the graphics. So just want to always do big acknowledgement of everything that it takes to create a program. So thank you all for being the community that tunes in with us. It really means a lot. And then, of course, a thank you to the Prison Yoga Project. Just another reminder that the incarceration and trauma program with the Prison Yoga Project and Trauma Research Foundation is Friday, September 16th, which is tomorrow. Can't believe it's already here, from 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific time. And it's going to be led by Bill Brown, who's the executive director. So come on in with that, again, talking about how to recognize trauma, signs of vicarious trauma in the context of incarceration. And lastly, of course, a massive, if we can all just take a moment in our hearts to send a lot of love and gratitude to Chris Wilson for, how do we even share gratitude? Is it gratitude for him to share his experience? Is it gratitude to the courage and the resilience, for the vulnerability, for all of the decisions that he made in his life that continued him through the absolute impossible, so that then he could be in a place to share and reflect with the world the injustices of the system as experienced from him in his direct experience. So just lots of appreciation and gratitude to now have this book out with us, and also to have this as a resource to keep sending it out to different communities and incarcerated populations around the world. So may we all continue to be advocates of his work, so that we can be a supporter of all communities, and especially incarcerated populations. So thank you all so much. We look forward to seeing you same time, same place next week, and we'll have 2 more episodes where we are coming together to discuss the master plan by Chris Wilson. So thank you all so much. Enjoy your evening, morning.